My cousin's cult. Praise the shadow on the wall. Hail the shadow that watches over all. Sacrifice your precious blood to the shadow god from up above. As I read the passage from the book, I regretted the very second I agreed to come with my cousin to this meeting with a close group of friends. So many thoughts rushed through my head. First, I can't believe my cousin is involved in a group like this. Second, I can't believe he would think I'd be okay with this. And third, this isn't a meeting with a close group of friends. It's a damn cult. The cult of the shadow god, they call themselves. Real cutesy shit, huh? I sent a dagger-like glance in my cousin's direction, and he notices. I don't think a look has ever said so much than the one I casted his way. He knew I called him the biggest piece of shit walking this earth, and he better get me the hell out of this shithole of a situation, or I'd be kicking that ass pronto, just with my eyes. I started to rise from my seat, but this, my friends, is where the plot thickens, as the saying goes. The doors crash open. I sit back down in my seat. In walks two giant men, dressed in black robes, carrying a woman who's struggling to break free. Her mouth is gagged, muffling her screams. I look on as they place her half-nude body on the altar, lighting 6 long black stick candles around her. I look at my cousin once again, motioning to him to stop this before it gets out of hand. He just stares at me with a dumb blank expression. I look back towards the altar. A curtain behind the girl parts, and in walks a man in a red robe. Welcome, fellow members. Tonight's the night. We offer up another sacrifice to the one true God, the all-powerful God of Shadows. I couldn't listen to this shit anymore. I jumped up and ran towards the altar, screaming my cousin's name and motioning to him to come help me. I couldn't just sit here and watch as this poor girl was sacrificed. I got to the top step, reached across the girl on the altar, and knocked the man in the red robe out. I looked down at the girl to untie her, but to my shock, she isn't tied down. She giggles. What the hell is going on? I thought. Just then I felt a thud on the back of my head. Blackness. I came to, not able to move. I'm on my back. All the members of the cult looking down at me, including the girl. Jesus, I'm tied to this altar, I thought. I hear my cousin's voice. I see 2 robed men stand aside, and there he stood. Sweet, sweet cousin, you fell for the ruse. I knew you would never go for any of this. I knew you wouldn't want to be in this cult. You see, the girl was never the intended sacrifice. No, just a ploy. You, my sweet cousin, you were the intended sacrifice, because I knew you'd try and be the hero. You always do, and that's exactly what we need, the blood of a hero. Son of a bitch, I thought. Well, you know what they say. Nice guys finish last. Dad hasn't been taking the divorce well. My dad has not been taking the divorce well. I mean, I get it. He's upset that my mom and him had a falling out. But that doesn't justify him following us when we moved into a new neighborhood. The new community was supposed to be a fresh start, according to Mom. But it's pretty hard to start over when your dad has his car parked across the street from you all the time. Seriously, all the time. I'm pretty sure he sleeps in the car. And one time, when we went to the block party, I swear he was recording our interactions with the neighbors. Like, I love the guy and all, but he needs to get a hobby. Start over, like Mom and I have. He's tried to talk to me when Mom isn't around. Wants me to come with him, which I always say no to. Why would I go with someone who's basically my stalker? He's also like, weirdly insistent that I stop going to church. How random is that? I don't care if we are blood related, because at the end of the day, the community is more important than any family member. When I ask her about Dad, Mom says that our problems don't matter, since we'll all be ascending soon anyway. I guess she's right. Still, I can't help but worry and hope my dad will stop being paranoid over nothing. Cult-De-Sac. This has really gone too far, I think, tugging at a mask that keeps slipping over my eyes. I mean, seriously, what the fuck am I even doing right now? We were so excited when we found this place. Kate and I wanted to settle down, maybe start a family, and buy a minivan with all those atrocious stick-figure people on the back of it. And Shady Acres seemed like just the ticket. A nice, quiet neighborhood, tucked away in our own little slice of suburban paradise. We bought a charming 3-bedroom monstrosity, smack dab in the middle of a cul-de-sac. Life was good. Then we met the neighbors. We took the liberty of guessing the sizes, Candace chirped, stuffing a pair of robes into Kate's arms. Of course, if anything needs adjusting, I'm right next door. See you at the block party Saturday? With that, she had left us perplexed. At the party, we were the only ones not wearing our robes. Kate feared we would be ostracized if we didn't put them on, but it was all a bit weird to me. I resisted. It's like a toga party. Loosen up, she insisted. Reluctantly, I donned the wretched garment and mingled with our new neighbors. That was months ago, and since, things have gotten weirder. With every block party, something new has been added to the ceremony, like the masks and the chants in some ancient language. And tonight, I was presented with a ceremonial blade. I stared at the blade in my hand, thinking to myself, how fucked up this situation had truly got. How had I let Kate drag me into this? Candace was batshit crazy, and I was the only person in the room that could see it. Kate placed her hand on my shoulder. What's the matter, babe? Kate asked. Nothing, I lied. Candace, stepping into the living room, and the gathering of men and women, all wearing robes, turned to face her. The offering is about to proceed, Candace said loudly. Everyone began to gather around the makeshift altar in the center of the living room. Candace gestured for myself and Kate to come forward. We both approached the altar. Okay, Kate, lay down on the altar. Candace said, with a voice of authority. Kate laid on the altar without question. Now stab her heart with the blade, Candace said. I gave Candace a questionable look. No fucking way. Are you actually serious? I replied. Candace's face became angry. We don't play games here. We serve the Lord, Candace replied coldly. I dropped the blade onto the floor and grabbed Kate's arm. I was going to drag her out of this nut house and report it to the police. Suddenly, everything went black. And when I opened my eyes, I was laying on the altar, my hands and feet both tied. And when I saw Kate standing over me with the ceremonial blade in hand, I felt nothing but betrayal. I am going to allow an accusation send me to prison, even though I didn't do it. I'm going to allow an accusation to take me to prison, even though I didn't do any crime, and I have CCTV security footage to prove it. It sounds crazy, I know, but you see, I am part of a group, or even a cult, that believes all forms of CCTV cameras are bad. We're like Orwell extremists. We believe that CCTV cameras, being all over society, is a way for the rulers of this world to control us and take away our privacy. I am one of the newest members now, and I am now at the last phase of initiation. The last part of this group's initiation is where they put a camera in front of me, which will be recording me at all times. Then someone from this group will commit a crime, and I will then be accused of doing it. The test is whether I will flinch or break down and let the temptation of using the CCTV coverage to help me. You see, this group is so against of using any kind of CCTV cameras that even in the case of being accused of something, they still think CCTV cameras are bad and shouldn't be used. I remember being inside a crappy hotel room with a camera recording me inside the hotel room. One of the members did something to the hotel and ran off, and I got accused for vandalizing it. This hotel was so crappy that it didn't even have its own CCTV coverage. It's basically a dinosaur. Anyway, I got put in prison for a couple of weeks and had to do free voluntary work collecting rubbish. This didn't feel so bad, and I had to do it one last time. And I was in another dreadful hotel room with a camera of our own recording me. A woman and a child who belonged to the same cult as me were going to do something and blame it on me. I was then texted to hide the camera, but to let it still keep on recording me. Days went by, and I survived on terrible hotel food. Then all of a sudden, police broke through the doors and arrested me, as I was accused of murdering a woman and a child in the forest opposite this hotel. There were no other cameras around, apart from the one that was secretly recording me, and the temptation was there to tell the authorities of the camera that was recording me for days, being inside the hotel room. But I fought against that temptation. My group is so proud of me, and I passed the initiation. The Smiley Face Cult. We knew it was the work of a cult They left their insignia at each of the murders, a simple smiley face, painted in blood. The manner varied, but there was a pattern: restraints and strangulation, torture and stab wounds, mangled corpses drained of blood. Each crime scene was a love letter to a serial killer. What we didn't understand was that it wasn't about killing. Their killing had a purpose. We were expecting resistance when we raided the compound. We expected panic or hatred, but their leader only patiently endured as we handcuffed them. "You're going away for a long time," my partner told them, forcing them roughly into the squad car. To our surprise, they smiled. "It doesn't matter," they said, a look of euphoria on their face. "It's already done." The radio on my belt crackled. Our men had found something in the basement. "It looks like another crime." "Wait, what's that? What's happening? Oh my God, oh my..." And then silence. My partner and I rushed to the basement, guns drawn. Screams drew us down, and when they suddenly cut off, we stalked ahead, barely breathing. It was obvious at first glance that the basement was their ritual space. Runes marked walls and floor, and candles burnt down to puddles. The bodies of my friends and colleagues littered the space, blood an inch thick on the floor. Crouched over them, feasting on the still warm flesh, was a monster. My hand shook as my mind struggled to comprehend its grotesque body. A dozen arms protruded from its heavily muscled torso, flexing and flailing in all directions. The legs were thick as barrels, the skin so tight it burst the muscles in places, raw meat showing through. Put your hands up!" I stared in shock at my partner. What on earth was he doing? This thing obviously wasn't a person. There was no way we could bring it in. At his shout, the thing paused its feasting. With a wet thud, it dropped the body it was devouring and stood. Its full height had to be at least 12 feet, its head nearly scraping the ceiling. In the dim light, I could see there was something wrong with its head. There were bumps and bald patches, as though it was ill. When it turned to face us, I understood my mistake. It had not one head, but many. They piled on its shoulders and protruded from its chest. Raking my eyes over this nightmare, I recognized faces. Dahmer, Gein, Bundy, Gacy. The thing lumbered forward, reaching its many hands towards us. My partner and I fired, working solely on instinct, until our guns clicked empty. The thing only laughed in dozens of distorted voices and reached for us again. The apartment cult. I've always hated the new house I lived in. The sink was rusty, things were broken, and the neighbors were super loud. Every time I took a shower, the light would go out, and I would hear scratching on the walls. I tried to stay up every night to make sure nothing terrible is happening. One time, I fell asleep and woke up to scratches on my leg. The weirdest thing is, I live alone. The neighbors are pretty nice to me, but they seem strange. They offer me to stay at their place, but every apartment is the same as mine. My little brother Tim would stop by since he works at a 7-Eleven nearby. Every Thursday, for some reason, all my neighbors gather around and light a campfire. I thought it was normal, but they kept inviting me. "Johnny, why don't you come with us to the ceremony?" they always ask. "Sorry, I'm busy," I reply back. For some reason, every time they ask, they get more aggressive. "Come with us." The weirdest thing, so far, was when I opened my fridge. There was a fake human head in there. I freaked out and hit my head on the table. That made me pass out. I guess one of my neighbors found me and took care of me. They let me use their shower, but something seemed off. Their place looked super clean and had no damage. That wasn't the same as mine. I walked outside for some fresh air, and they were doing the ceremony again. But I saw something weird. Instead of a campfire, it was a huge cross. Someone was hanging from it. One of the neighbors spotted me and shouted for everyone. I was being chased with weapons I never knew existed. What the hell is happening? Someone stopped in front of me and hit me on the head with a pipe. The people I thought were friendly, they were evil. I woke up to a fire burning under me, and it burnt my foot a little. Little by little, they let down a rope that was tied around my waist. It was like they were trying to kill me. Luckily, my brother saw what was happening and called the police. When the police arrived, everyone was gone, and they let me off of the rope. I found out that everyone that was in the ritual was a wanted criminal. This wasn't the first time they did this. They did this over 13 times. I was going to be their 14th sacrifice to their god. I walked back to my room, and I saw a little opening to somewhere. I opened the hatch and saw they worshipped the devil. I never heard from anyone there again. Cult of the North Woods. Hello, my name is Roscoe, and I have a story to share. The story is a bit crazy and long-winded, so I hope you can follow along. But before I tell you all my story, I need to tell you about some things that happened prior to this tale. So my uncle had purchased some hunting land years ago, when I was just a little boy. My father and I made a habit of visiting there at least once a year. We hunted every kind of animal there was to hunt up there. From deer and squirrels to grouse and pheasant, and even a bear once. I grew to love going there every year, and the place held a lot of emotional and sentimental value for me. But 15 years later, my uncle would pass away and leave everything, the hunting land included, to his daughter. Now I knew full well my cousin would just end up selling the land and pissing away the money. So I bought the land from her, for very cheap I might add. And I went through all the trouble of making the land legally mine. Finally, once all the legal nonsense was taken care of, I was able to get out to see what kind of state the property was in. The grass was just under knee height, and the brush was beginning to grow back with a fury unheard of, but it was otherwise in good condition. Over the course of about a month, I went about mowing all the grass and brush, as well as clearing any fallen trees from the various paths. One evening, though, when I was packing away all my tools into the back of my UTV, after having just cut up a tree that fallen a little ways from a cabin my uncle had built on the property. Something strange happened. I was leaning against the driver's side of the UTV when I saw two figures wearing yellow raincoats and black bandanas covering their faces. They walked across the path that was about 20 yards off to my left and into the wood. I'm not sure if they actually saw me or knew I was even there, but nonetheless, I was shocked and confused. I had no idea why anyone would be there that far out into the woods. But it wasn't impossible for someone to be on my land and may not know about it, as I own quite a bit of land. I called the local non-emergency line of the local police station and informed them that I'd spotted a couple of trespassers on my property. They said they would send a couple of officers to check it out, and I thanked them and hung up. In the meantime, I decided I would follow the two strangers and maybe hold them until the cops arrived, if need be. So I grabbed my AR from the rack in my UTV as I was in an area that had a dense population of bears at the time, and commenced to tracking the two raincoat-wearing strangers. It eventually began to get dark, but even then, it wasn't too hard to follow them, as they weren't exactly quiet, and they created a pretty obvious path through the undergrowth. Eventually, we came to an area of the property that was in the rough shape of a basin, with a clearing dead center of it. The two people I was following went down a slope and made their way into the clearing. As I stayed atop the slope, I watched in shock and disbelief as even more people, all clad in yellow raincoats and black bandanas, entered the clearing. I don't know exactly how many there were, but I estimated there to be maybe 50 in total, all of whom were carrying torches and even the odd lantern. They all were gathered at the edges of the clearing, but that wasn't what caught my attention. Two of these apparent cultists carried in a large wooden crate, and they were followed by two more of their compatriots, who themselves were carrying a woman who was bound and gagged. And finally, an older white man wearing a flowing white robe strode towards the center of the clearing, where the woman and crate were situated. He began saying something to his flock that I couldn't make out. As he was carrying on, I pulled out my phone to once again call the police. But when I looked in the corner of the screen, I didn't have any bars. But luckily, my phone had a feature that allowed it to send out an emergency signal, and the authorities could pick up on it and find my location. Since I didn't have any other option, I set off the signal before turning my attention back to the scene playing out before me. The cult leader then gestured at two of his subordinates, and they picked up the bound woman and laid her inside the large wooden crate. Then, from the folds of his robe, the cult leader pulled out what looked like a two-handed European long sword. He slowly raised it above his head, and as he did so, I snapped out of my reverie and lined the sights of my gun up with the cult leader. As the trigger was pulled, a gunshot rang out, and I saw the cult leader stumble back and then fall to the ground. After hearing the gunshot and seeing their leader keel over, some of the cultists took off running, while others looked in my direction, trying to figure out where the shot had come from. At that point, I decided it would be best to go back to the entrance of the property to meet up with the cops. I slowly crept back whilst keeping low to the ground to avoid being seen. Once I'd made it back to the entrance, I was greeted by half a dozen cops, who I imagined were dispatched after my emergency phone signal had been detected. I quickly explained the situation to the officers, and I led them to where the cultists had been. But when we got to the top of the little game trail that led down to the clearing, I stopped. I could just barely see a yellow raincoat peeking out from behind a tree, off to the right, at the bottom of the game trail. I slowly raised my rifle and shouted at the person to come out, but they didn't move. I shouted again for them to come out, or I'd shoot. Again, they didn't move, so I fired a single shot at the tree, which scared the guy into coming out with his hands raised. 2 cops cuffed the man and took him back to the cars, while the rest of us checked out the clearing. In the time I'd gone to get the cops and bring them back, all the cultists had cleared out, leaving nary a trace behind. The only indication that anyone had been there was matted grass where people had stood. There wasn't even the smallest amount of blood where the cult leader had fallen. I looked at the cops saying, "They were here, I swear." But I don't think they completely believed me. If not for the cultists they'd just arrested, they likely wouldn't believe me at all. I walked back to Cruisers with the cops and gave my statement on what had happened and gave a description of the woman I'd seen. And the cops left, promising to get into contact with me if anything promising came up. But they never did contact me, and I never learned anything new about the cult or the woman. I don't expect any of you to believe my story, but if you ever find yourself in the North Woods of Minnesota, watch out and stay safe. Sink in the closet. Something is wrong with the architecture of this house. We just moved here last month, and I have gotten used to a lot of new things around here, as my neighbors and classmates seem very normal. One thing, however, that is not normal is this house. Whoever the architect was, it feels like they had never been inside a house before, almost as if they were an alien. For example, the sink in the closet. What's up with that? Whenever I wash my hands or brush my teeth, I also get my clothes wet. There's also the fact that my bedroom is shaped like a triangle. Not even a right triangle. I think it's an isosceles. It feels very wrong. My bed is at a weird angle, and there is an oddly shaped part of my room that is inaccessible without traversing the bed. I didn't understand why my parents would buy such a house. But when they told me it was inherited from a late uncle of mine, some things started to make sense. You see, my uncle designed this house and lived here with his 10 adopted children in an attempt to start a strange cult. That's why the house looked normal on the outside, so no one would suspect a thing. As for the purposes of these strange structures, I would probably never understand. They had to do with some strange cults, beliefs, practices, and rites. It was all beyond me, for sure. Why was there a sink in the closet, adjacent to my triangular room? No idea. Why were the walls and ceilings carpeted, but not the floors? No idea. What was with the twisted iron spike sticking out of the fireplace. No idea. Turns out you can get used to just about anything. The basement door. When I was a child, there was a room in my house that we were not allowed in. My father would yell and scream when we tried to open the locked door. My mother would cry when we questioned her. We, being myself and my younger brothers, would always talk to each other about what it could be. We were never allowed out of our rooms at night. We would hear blood-curdling screams at night. Those sounds kept us hiding. My brothers would sneak to my room through the closet that connected our rooms when they were afraid. We would be huddled in the closet that only I had. Our rooms were set up that even though we had a closet that we shared, we had our own closet. We would hide and stay awake, not being able to sleep when the screams were going on. My older brother, Alan, soon went missing. I had 3 younger brothers and 1 older brother. When he went missing, my parents refused to talk about him. 2 months after Alan went missing, Thomas, one of my younger brothers, went missing. Again, my parents would not look for him. I grew up and went to college, much to my mother's dismay. I learned she was very traditional and wanted me to marry at a young age. My remaining brothers, Louis and Richard, visited me constantly. Every time they visited, they looked more and more afraid. Afraid of what? I have no idea. The last time I saw Richard, he told me something was wrong back home. The very next day, he was missing. I had to talk to Louis. My mother and father refused to let me see him. They told me he was sick. I was going to visit Louis soon. When I arrived back home, I knocked on the door. It creaked open. My father stood there. He glared at me. I smiled at him. My father opened the door a little more to let me in. I thought we told you that Louis is sick. I still want to speak to him. Am I not allowed to speak to my own brother? Begrudgingly, my father led me to Louis's room. He was laying on his bed in a pool of sweat, with a cloth over his head. I walked to his bedside. Hey, Louis, are you feeling okay? Louis didn't open his eyes, but he nodded. My father left the room. I quickly asked, Do you need me to get you out of here? He nodded quickly. I know what's in the basement. What is it? A cult. They sacrifice boys. That's where Alan, Thomas, and Richard went. A creaking sounded on the floorboards. I turned around, only to get smacked in the side of the head. When I woke up, I was tied up in a room I'd never seen. Louis was lying on the floor in what it appears to be some cultist symbol. People surrounded him. They chanted something I couldn't understand. Louis started convulsing. His chest broke open to reveal a demonic-looking creature. My father spoke. Osmanthus, we have brought you a girl for food. He points at me. Cult in the country. I've lived in about 7 houses my entire life, since my parents are divorced. The amount is higher. That and my mother moves around quite a bit. About 3 years ago, we lived in the countryside, a few miles away from the nearest town, but not completely isolated. We had neighbors right behind us and then down from us. There was also a horse riding facility nearby and a lot of fields. I didn't really like living there. The house was always dark and cold, and I never really liked how out of the way we were. I was used to living literally right next to a busy street. Anyways, I always found the surrounding countryside very eerie. Our garden was huge. There was a clubhouse, a garage, and a weird storage house, along with a very large gravel driveway. That'll be relevant later. Now, I never actually experienced any sort of unusual activity inside the house. It was always outside. At night, I'd often hear the gravel crunching, as if someone was walking over it, which was creepy enough, but that's not all. I would constantly hear animal noises, a cow mooing frequently, a strange sort of squawking, which didn't sound like any sort of animal I'd heard. You might be thinking, what's weird hearing cows in the country? Well, there were no cows anywhere. There were vast fields, but all overgrown and not in use, so no farmers had placed any of their livestock there. The mooing was frequent, always seemed to happen during the night, while other strange noises seemed to circulate too. The clubhouse had a small window that looked slightly into the window of one of the bedrooms. My bedroom at first, but I could never shake the feeling that sometimes there would be the print of a face left in the forming condensation. So I moved to another one. I would sometimes take the dog for walks in the field right next to our house, but I'd never go far. The feeling I got was so sinister, I'd often end up literally running through the field back home. One day, I found a saw lying in the middle. It seemed brand new, except the ridges were dirty brown. I'd like to hope it was just rusting. I'd find a lot of dead animals in the field, more than was natural, I would say. There was always the sickly sweet smell of decay lingering outside. One summer evening, in the distance, I could hear laughing, faint screaming of a girl, and flickers of fire in the wooded distance. I told my mother to come out and listen, but she told me it was probably just someone having a party. I didn't believe her. I can't explain any of those events. They're all kind of random, and I'm telling them to the best I can remember. But the theory I stick to is the countryside was probably the ideal place for some sort of cult gatherings. I wouldn't put it past them to have wandered throughout the gardens, mine included, and got up to some freaky shit in the fields, out in the back, hidden by the woodland. I don't really know. There were a lot of fires that burned in the far distance, a lot of strange noises. So that's really the only logical explanation I can think of. Sometimes a car would be parked on the road outside my house during the night, then gone by the morning. But I can only speculate. Whatever the reasons, is a scary prospect, and hopefully there was nothing of a sinister nature going on. I thought I was alone in the campsite, but I was wrong. My mother owned a campsite with static caravans. It was on a big field surrounded by trees from every side, except the path that led down to a small beach. And the whole thing was a 20-minute drive to the nearest building. It was a place of absolute tranquility. The caravan owners paid her to rent a specific lot, then paid me to clean them when they weren't in use. It was a good gig, and it kept me busy. That was the last good thing about it. My girlfriend had recently broken up with me, and I wanted to get out of town for a while. My mother said that since it was off-peak and the site was empty, I could stay in one of her caravans for a couple of nights. I didn't have a driver's license at the time, so she drove me up there, left some instructions, then went home. The sun was going down now, so I cracked open a bottle of wine and put on a couple of scary movies. Big mistake, right? Time went on, and I was having fun. The Strangers was a new movie at the time, about home invasion, and I was enjoying it. The film didn't scare me, even though I had headphones on to become more absorbed by it. But something else rattled me. A rapid, heavy pounding thundered through the window beside me. I tore off my headphones and listened carefully. After 30 seconds or so, I was ready to dismiss it when it happened again. Truly spooked now, I decided there was no way I was opening the door to find out who it was. So I waited like a coward, keeping low so my silhouette wouldn't be seen through the curtains. I heard footsteps outside, low mumbling, and then someone tried aggressively opening the door. By now my entire body was ice cold. There was no phone reception out there, so I had no idea what to do other than wait it out and pray nobody came in. I waited. Morning came, and I'd barely slept. I decided early on that I'd get out of there as soon as the sun was up. I packed my things and stepped outside, rushing to the exit. My plan was to walk as far as I could down the empty, narrow country road until I could find reception to call my mother. I didn't make it that far. A car slowed down behind me. I tried to pretend I didn't hear it, but when the authoritative voice told me to stop, I had to turn around. 2 policemen were coming toward me, asking what I was doing. Relieved, I explained everything while they exchanged worried glances. They invited me into the car and took me into town. When they stopped the car, they finally told me the truth. Apparently, there had been multiple reports of some sort of cult living in the woods. They'd last been seen heading in the direction of the campsite in navy robes and goat-face masks. Needless to say, I turned white. Weeks went on, and we heard nothing more. The site reopened, and visitors came back in for relaxing trips. A couple months after that, there was a big investigation after 2 sisters went missing, 15 and 17 years old. They were never heard from again. 10 years have passed, and I still wonder what would have happened if I'd opened that door. Worse yet, I can't stop wondering if those girls had been swept away by the tide, attacked by some sort of animal, or snatched up by a creepy cult that hangs out in the woods. I guess we'll never know. That time of year, They're outside, gathered in groups of 2 to 4, some roaming house to house, others just sitting and staring, not moving a single muscle. I guess I should start at the beginning. It was a normal day for October, a bit warmer than normal, but I wasn't complaining. I like having the windows open, fresh air and all that. I was flipping through the channels since I'd just finished binge watching the new season of American Horror Story on Netflix when the news caught my attention. It said that there was a rash of home invasion deaths. All they knew was that the screens to windows and doors were torn open, and they think that that was how they were gaining injury. The bodies of men, women, children, pets, it didn't matter, were stripped of skin and left to rot. No one knew who it was, but there were theories being thrown around like crazy. Some said the recent killer clowns were to blame. Others said a cult started on the internet. Others still said some religious bullshit. We started noticing it yesterday. They weren't running and playing like usual. Sure, they stop and stare every once in a while, but you usually ignore that. Then the screams started. Now I'm holed up in here, in my house, cursing the fact that I just had to live in the country by some woods. I'm seriously outnumbered here. After all, it's the time of year squirrels gather their food. So much for a protector. They never understood our problem. I doubt anyone ever will. It's just really sad that after all these years, no one believes us, and no one ever survives. No one. We tried a doctor. He didn't believe it. Said if we would like to have an appointment with a psychiatrist. We just left. We knew it already started. We tried a normal citizen. She said I was nuts, a hillbilly. The others chased us away from the neighborhood. They're taking over. We went to the church, seeking the parish priest, hoping that he would understand. But he, a man supposed to be an instrument of God, is now under it. He's no use. We still tried, although I already knew it's already over. Soon, they will have had it spread all over the town and had it on their control. Me and my daughter stole a car and drove away, aiming for the next town, hoping that we can prevent the cult's evil plans. A cop gave us chase. So much for a protector. I had no choice. I shot him in the head. He stumbled all over the road and continuously twitched and gasped for air. Poor man, I muttered as I performed the Holy Cross. I ran over him to end his suffering. But even though I should have expected it, it still surprised me that he got up, his head replaced with a tentacled parasite of the plague.